Good evening. It's good to have the opportunity to come out here once again to see you guys this evening. It is a blessing and a privilege to have the opportunity to speak before you. I know Tracy's not with me, and I hope you guys will tolerate me this evening. But I brought suckers, so I know the kids will like me. So she did tell me before I was warned. I said, I better bring suckers if I'm coming by myself. So I did, and if I run out some, I got more in the car. So. But I do appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come here. I always enjoy coming out here to Wellsburg. And I hope the message that I speak of here will be encouraging and edifying to all, and also kind of examine ourselves. And also because when we talk about gambling, and that's the kind of title of the sermon tonight, we need to ask ourselves other questions, not just necessary is gambling the problem, because while we see that it is very prevalent around us, we can get into a habit of being kind of complacent with the situation. Let me tell you a couple things. There's a couple reasons why I did this sermon on gambling. I think I told some of you guys, I had an opportunity to have a roundtable discussion with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And we all sat down, we was trying to give more insight to how to get more people to come to the ballpark. And of course, they wouldn't listen to winning, but I can tell you another story about today, but that's something else. So, but they wanted options or ideas, and while we talked about all the ideas that we had, one of the things that the organization brought up was this. They said, what would it be like if we just put $1 bet on every ticket of admission? And one of the more surprising individuals that responded was a guy that actually did gamble, and he said that is a horrible idea. He says, because I know what the dangers are when it comes to gambling and addictions that is involved in it. And that's like putting someone with a beer or somebody with a gun. You know the dangers are there, but you were willing to do it anyways. And then, as many times as I watch TV and there's all of a sudden commercials on there where it talks about Rivers Casino. And that's not too far. It's up in Pittsburgh. And we know there's one down here in Wheeling Park. And we could go on and on where we could see really kind of being saturated with advertising for gambling. And it's always predicated like this. It's fun, it's entertainment, there's no problems going on behind it. And we try to see, many will argue, well, it's just a game, it's just entertainment. But the thing I find very disturbing is some of the telltale signs and red flags, if you will, of how gambling can become very sinful if we're not careful. And that's what I want to talk about here tonight. I want to ask the questions about what is gambling, and also, is it a sin? And respond to the idea from some that says, well, it's not in the Bible. I don't see anywhere it says thou shalt not gamble or thou shalt not bet. And you're right. But there's other things that we could talk about there too. And what is the difference in buying stock compared to gambling or farming? And some that make the argument that, well, it's no different from being on the stock market, and it's no different from a farmer taking risks as well. And then the common thought is, what if I always win? And there's this idea that there is that individual out there that always wins when it comes to betting. And brethren, from what I've gathered from all my studies, it's not out there. There's not some guy out there that always wins. Because if that guy was always out there to win, one, he'd never be allowed in a casino. Two, he would also kind of defy the odds of the chances and the logic behind when it comes to the odds of an individual winning consecutively that often. And every individual I looked at when it comes to being the winningest individuals of all time, it came with an incredible amount of losses along with it too. So these are the things I want to talk about here tonight, and I hope that we'll be encouraged by this. The definition, the basic definition for gambling is play games for a chance of money. And I want us to look at these two definitions. The Oxford Dictionary will say bet on a game of chance. And I want us to keep those two definitions in mind, because when we go into the argument of farming and we go into the argument of the stock market, you will see that there is a very stark contrast between the stock market and gambling. And you also see there's a stark contrast when it comes to farming and gambling. So just keep that in mind, because nobody will make the argument that this is the actual definition when it comes to gambling. So keep that in mind as we continue on in our study. You will see that there is not one single verse that plainly states, "Thou shalt not gamble." And while gambling is a sin, however, we must ask ourselves if the attributes of gambling can lead to sin. Many will argue because the action is not plainly stated in Scripture, and therefore, if it's not mentioned, it must be permissible. Speak where the Bible speaks, be silent where the Bible's silent. However, though, there is a variety of things concerning sin that we know that is not in the Bible that is a sin. For example, it does not say, "Thou shalt not do drugs." We all understand that the attributes from drugs carry two very things that causes us to sin. One is the lose of self-control, and that's in 1 Peter. Also, 1 Peter and 2 Peter. But also, too, we see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 tells us about how we should take care of this body. So we can understand that even though it's not stated plainly in the Scriptures, we know that through other verses, this is a bad idea. And that's what I hope to bring to you here this evening. Look, if you will, and ask yourself these questions. The principles of one question I want you to ask is, what is the principles of what to do with my money? While gambling is not mentioned in the Scripture, how we handle our money is all but silent. We see there's a variety of things that talks about our wealth. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 20 says, "Precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it." And that's what we see sometimes, and this should be kept in mind when we talk about investing. Because I don't know about you, but investing is not an overnight success. Investing takes years. And if we want to have a 100% return on our investing, we're going to take some time to get it back. Well, however, when it comes to gambling, gambling comes in a finger snap. Whether you could be rich or you could be poor. And it just takes a moment when it comes to gambling. And individuals are not very successful after long periods of gambling. And you see that through a lot of the individuals that are infamous for poker playing, for horse racing. I can just go on and on with a variety of individuals that may have been successful at one point, but unfortunately are not very successful now. Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 also reminds us too that when it comes to our heart, we know where our treasure is. And we understand that there is that materialistic mindset when it comes to gambling. And I want us to be clear on this too. It does not mean that a materialistic mind is just solely belong to rich people. You can understand through scriptures, and I want to make this clear, just because you have wealth, and maybe you're wealthier than others, does not mean you're living in sin. It is the mindset when it comes to your wealth, though, is the problem. For example, if you look at Noah, you look at David, you see two examples of individuals that had great wealth. But fortunately, they never became material-minded. You also see examples, too, of individuals that were very poor, didn't have as much money as others, and were also very materialistic-minded. You think about Gehazi with Naaman. You think about Judas Iscariot. Individuals that really primarily had materialistic minds when it comes to the treasure. So, if we think about that and we talk about this kind of mindset when it comes to gambling, and we say to ourselves, well, no, I don't have this mindset of taking anybody's money. I'm just doing this for fun. Well, if it is just for fun, then why not take the element that can cause us to sin? I know there's a bunch of us that play fantasy football. You know, and the funny thing is, and I know Nathan has told me on multiple occasions, some people ask him, why don't you put some money on it? Why? That's my question. That's my response. If I'm doing this just for fun, what's the problem of doing it without money being involved? And that's the argument that we see sometimes when someone tells us, well, this is just for fun and this is just for entertainment. Well, take that out of the equation and ask me how much fun it is. The thing is, when that is taken out, it seems like people get upset. You know, I thought about on the way up here, I was like, man, there's some things I want to bring to come to mind when it comes to gambling. And for some reason, an episode of The Office comes up, and it was casino night on the episode, and it was where Toby was able to take Michael Scott's money from a game of poker. And you remember what he said? He said, I think that felt pretty good. And that's kind of that little mindset, though, is where we think that if we are able to take something away from someone, and we're better than that, then it feels pretty good. But you also keep in mind, too, that's not should be the mindset for us. And that's where one of the dangers when it comes to gambling comes, is where we say to ourselves, well, I could take this away from somebody, and I could feel all right about it. Why? That's not a violation of God or a principle of Christians. Why would we say that's okay to do? That's called covetousness. Think about this, too. Look there in Psalms chapter 62, verse 10. It says, if riches increase, set not your heart on them. When we talk about uncertain riches there in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, we have to ask ourselves, where does this money come from if I'm gambling? Where does that come from? Does that come from the casino itself? Or did that come from the backs of individuals that lost? Keep in mind that when it comes to doing things in this world to have great riches, one, don't set our mind on it. Two, also keep in mind, too, that we should be able to do this where there's no question of dishonesty that comes into it. There's no second guessing, there's no bribery, there's no usury, there's no kind of things that could be associated with what we do to make a living. And while those individuals that are very few and far between that have make a living off gambling, they are just that, few and far between. You may count maybe 10 people that have been successful at gambling for a living. I could tell you tenfold of how many people that have lost money and have become broke and are destitute for the rest of their lives. According to one statistic, they said 70% of gamblers end up becoming completely broke. 70%. That's 7 out of 10 people that is losing money and come completely broke because they think they can win it big. Now keep this in mind too. Think about there in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. The individual says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money. And maybe some translations to King James says silver. But we all get the point, whether it's silver or it's money, because silver was the commodity at the time. Silver was shiny and was noticeable. And it says, he who loves money will never be satisfied with money, nor he who loves his wealth with his income. This is also vanity. Solomon comes to the understanding that we think that we can never have enough. We say to ourselves, if I had $100,000, I'll be content. Well, what happens when we get that? Well, we want more. I'd be happy with 500,000. I'd be happy with $1 million. We go on until we say to ourselves, we can never get to the point we achieve. That's greed. And that's a sin. You know, the common misconception with a lot of people in the world today is if they have this, they're able to get that. If I can't have, I'll tell you a story of one of my friends at Lowe's. He thought to himself, he says, if I got the chance, and it was during when the Powerball was like 300, 500 million, he says, you know, if I win this, he says, you'll be my friend. I said, Kyle, I'll always be your friend. You don't have to have this money to have my friendship. And that's just the point. We think because if we have these great riches, we have great relationships with individuals. But we're all not naive and foolish enough to say to ourselves that an individual is drawn to a person because of their looks or because of their personality. We see a lot of people are drawn because of that wealth. There's too many sad, tragic stories of individuals who have won lottery winnings, and one is very infamous in West Virginia, where he has had many people steal from him, had many people use him, had many people try to deceive him. And all these Powerball winners, if you ever looked at the history of them, some of them have went into seclusion. And it's due to the fact that it not only does it draw people that you might want to have around you, but it also draws people that you don't want to have around you. It's just like modesty. When a person's immodest, they get attention all right, but sometimes they get attention from people they don't want attention from. Same way with covetousness. Covetousness, you may get attention from people you want, but you will also get people that you don't want around trying to get your attention. So understand that money does not necessarily buy happiness, because we always have this striving to have more, and we're constantly looking ways to get rich. If you look at 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, where you see that it talks about this desire of having money, and it talks about the love of money, and it's a root of all kinds of evil, and it's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. And one of the questions we'll ask here in a little bit is, does this breed other sins? Just like David, when he looks to Bathsheba and sees her bathing, you see that led to many other sins. The thing that we have to ask ourselves when it comes to gambling in this day and age is, does this draw me to commit sin? And don't think it's not that hard to gamble. I talked about that commercial I saw on TV from Rivers Casino, and there's this lady that dances around, and she tells you that you can gamble in your bathroom, you can gamble in your bed, you can gamble when you're at a party, you can gamble anywhere. It is that kind of thing. It's almost similar to pornography, where it's just something that's so easily acceptable. And once you get in, it seems like you can't get out. So ask yourself, does this violate self-control? Once again, I told you earlier about how Peter tells us twice in both his epistles that that we need to have self-control. We need to be sober-minded. And when it comes to our faith, this should be added with us, with our knowledge, with steadfastness. And if these things violate our self-control, then why have a warning? I apologize. Oh, you can see that. If there's no concern for an individual to lose self-control, then why ever have a warning? Maybe you've seen a warning like this, where someone has put on there and says, remember, it's just a game. I think in some of the lotteries, the West Virginia lottery I know in particular, makes it sound like a gamble all the time, but I don't, I promise you. But at the bottom of West Virginia lottery, it just reminds us, please play responsibly. And that is on every casino, that is on every online gambling site, that is at every place that has money involved. And it's trying to remind you that you can lose control over this. I don't know if anybody uses a hairdryer, but do you know that there's a warning label on hairdryers now that tells you, don't use the hairdryer while you're in the shower? Remember that, Dan. But you think about that. You have to be told, you have to have a label that tells you, don't use a hairdryer while you're in the shower. Because we know what will happen. You'll get electrocuted. You'll probably get killed if you use a hairdryer in the shower. But that tells you something, doesn't it? It tells me that somebody has done it before, and somebody has got killed from it. Now, there's common sense there. We say to ourselves, that's pretty dumb that we have to have that kind of warning. But it's also these kind of warnings, too, that we don't realize that it's telling you that this is dangerous. Just like smoking. It used to be for the longest time, it said smoking may cause cancer. For the longest time, it said that statement, may. Now it has changed, and this is where you see the drop in tobacco now, because it says smoking causes cancer. There's no second guessing around it. And brethren, I tell you, as much stories as I've seen of people taking money that does not belong to them and take gambling to a whole nother level and lose it big, don't think for a second that it cannot happen to you. Don't think for a second that it can happen to anybody. If they're putting warnings out there, it reminds us somebody has taken it too far, and we don't want to be responsible if it's you. Look, if you will, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. You see in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, it says, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Remember I told you the story about a can of snuff I have, and my friend gave it to me after he repented of his sins and came forward. And I told him, I said, here's this little can. It's not probably 2 to 3 inches in diameter. But this can controlled him. And he just decided there was one day it wasn't going to control him anymore. Same way with gambling. We think one time we win it big. We think we can win big again. Or we think we can win bigger and bigger. And if we lose some, we have this mindset that, well, no, we'll win bigger here in a little bit. It's called the Monte Carlo fallacy. There's also another theory I had, and I couldn't find it in my research, but it was also one that it's called a theory of next. There's just a couple theories out there that tell you about the dangers when it comes to taking this mindset. And what it means is the event has occurred less frequently as expected. It's more likely to happen again in the future. And this comes from the idea, if you ever see a roulette wheel, it's red and black. And at one time, it went black 26 times. Now, I want you to think about that from a gambling perspective. You're saying to yourself, when it hit black, you're going to say to yourself, it's going to hit red here. Okay, it's going to hit red here. Okay, it's going to hit red here. This mindset that when it comes to flipping a coin or rolling a roulette wheel, wherever there's this 50-50 chance, you think that it went one side one time, you think that it will go the other side the next time. And that doesn't necessarily happen. And the next time, and the theory of the next is the idea that you came so close. I think it's also called the theory of close. This idea that you came so close to winning big. And you say to yourself, I'll get there. I'll get there. I just got to try a couple more times. And sometimes you'll see casinos do just that. You get there. You almost got it. So you're willing to spend more to get there. And it's all mind games. And we say to ourselves that nothing controls me, but yet our own thoughts kind of control us to do things that we're not supposed to do. And that's where these things come into play as well. If you look at another question, we have to ask ourselves, does it promote other sins? If you look at Matthew chapter 7, verses 19 through 20, you see that it tells us that every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. You will recognize them by their fruits. Ask ourselves, what are the signs that you see when it comes to gambling? I was a big anti-promoter of gambling in Williamstown, in Wood County. And the reason being is because if you ever come to my place in Williamstown, you'll be surprised of all the coffee houses that are there. Those are the places to gamble. Of all the restaurants and gas stations and hotels that are in Williamstown combined, there is more gambling places in Williamstown, little old Williamstown, than gas stations, restaurants, hotels. And there's this, if you ever look where I live at, if you go off the interstate, there's 3 coffee houses as soon as you get off the interstate. If you go about maybe even a half mile after the roundabout, there's 2 more. There's one on one hill, and then there's 2 more to go up the hill. There's 6. Before I even entered, the sign that says, "Welcome to Williamstown." And I haven't even told you about the ones that are in Williamstown. And the lady that owns Da Vinci's, she tried hard to kind of lift the ban of having more in Williamstown so she could have her own slot machines in her restaurant. Because everybody has this idea that I'm going to make some money off this. And don't realize how there's so many other things that come along with it. If you look at a deck of cards, if you ever get a deck of cards from a casino, you will see that on the corners of each side are cut. The reason being is because they don't want those cards back in the casino and somebody trying to cheat them. There's a reason why in a lot of the casinos in Las Vegas, there's bulletproof glass on everything. And there's two reasons why. One is so nobody won't shoot in and try to steal. And also, nobody will try to shatter and jump out when they lose everything. The suicide rate in casinos is shocking. We talk about a lot of things that when it comes to suicide. Take the opportunity one time and just pit suicide at certain casinos. And you'll be appalled how often and how frequent it happens. Even with this glass intact, even when these things are put into place, people are still taking their lives because they have went so deep they cannot get out. There's where we see other sins happening. And we say to ourselves, well, that's not going to be me. But you know, brethren, I've heard the same people say that about alcohol. And I've seen the same people say that about drugs. And I've seen the same people say that about smoking. I've seen people say about those things that they say they'll never get into that situation. And guess what, brethren? They do. And it's bad. And no matter how hard you try to get them out of that hole, sometimes they don't want to get out of that hole because they're looking for that thrill once again. They're looking for that moment where everything felt all right, and it never comes back. No matter how hard they try, it never gets back to the point where they thought it was great. Now there's this argument. And some people say, well, the stock market is just the same as gambling. In Proverbs chapter 13, as Roland read there, it tells us wealthy gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase. There's some logic in that. And this is where you see gambling on one side and the stock market on another. There's a statistician out there that did the estimation about how long it would take for someone to get 100% back on their revenue when it comes to investing in the stock market. He says in 20 years' time, you will get 100% return on your investment. Now, some of you is like, well, no, I work the stock market. I never got that. But you look at the stats. And when it comes to investing, you're in favor. Now, when it comes to gambling, in that same time, it's minus 55 to 49%. You lost. Because we all heard that statement, the house always wins. But if we look at investing, we understand investing takes years. And investing is not some fly-by-night, just take a chance on black or red on a roulette wheel, or take a hit on a 15. And we see that when it comes to investing, there's work and preparation involved. And we see that we can make a portfolio where we don't have to lose money. If one stock loses money, we can gain it back by another. Some people think that, well, if I can't do well on the crap table, then I can get it in horse racing. It doesn't work that way. Yes, there are risks in both, but investing has return. I know some of my fantasy football buddies have probably seen this. Some of the sports guys have seen this about the guy from Jacksonville, Jaguars. the guy who decided to take $22 million and blow it on FanDuel. He was a financial advisor for the Jaguars. I know that sounds very ironic, but that's what happened. He took $22 million and blew it on FanDuel. It was on parlays. And when this all come to head, Jacksonville tried to get its money back from FanDuel. And let me tell you what they said. FanDuel said, no, the way we see it, we got this money fair and clear. It's not our problem that we have to forfeit it back to you. Money that they're aware of that is stolen, but yet said, no, we obtain this fair. There's where it comes to breeding other sins. This individual thought that he could never lose, but he ended up losing, and he ended up losing big. Some of you remember Shohei Ohtani. Some of you remember Pete Rose. I don't think Pete Rose deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm going to just throw that out there. I know people's going to get mad at me, but I tell you what, here's the reason why I don't believe he should go in the Hall of Fame. Because that guy has never been truthful about anything. That guy has lied from the get-go. That's sin. That's why he doesn't deserve to be in there. If he deserves to be in there, wait for him to pass away, and then he can get in there. Because he's never been honest about anything. There's where sin comes from doing this specific thing. And then that argument about farming. Think about how we look at farming, and some people make the argument, well, that's kind of like gambling too, because there's risk involved in that. Well, brethren, I think the individuals that make that argument probably have never been on a farm. Because, yes, they are risk involved, but the thing that comes with farming is hard work. Gambling comes on a hope. Gambling comes on a wish. There's no doubt that there takes effort and hard work in farming. Look there in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. It says, when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. When it comes to work and effort, gambling does not require this. Everything is based on a moment's chance. Look, Luke 14, verse 28. You see, it tells us, it says, for which you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost whether he has enough to complete it. And if you look at these things, you see where gambling, it usually has a game involved. Investing has someone's ownership. Farming has somebody's product, somebody's crops, somebody's stock. Just a variety of things when we look at farming. It is not on the same level when it comes to gambling, where you see that it involves a game. Gambling has no return on long risk. Farming and investing has a long-term return. Gambling has the house in their favor. When it comes to investing and farming, the farming and the investing is in their favor. Then somebody brought up the idea of casting lots. And somebody said, well, isn't casting lots kind of like gambling too? And there for a while, I thought casting lots was kind of like dice. But it's not like dice. If it's anything, it's kind of like taking straw poll. Where you see that in a cup, you put stones in it, and they're white, except for one, that's a black one. And when they take out of that cup those stones, the black one determines what is going on here. Maybe you remember in the book of Jonah, they cast lots there, and the lot fell on Jonah and says, what have you done? And we see through God's divine influence, we see that God tells him, Jonah, you've done something wrong. You better fess up now. We see also in John chapter 19, verse 24, it tells us, it says, let's not tear this one piece of garment that was by Christ. He says, let's cast lots to see whose it shall be. And this is prophecy fulfilled. The thing is, we can't see this in form of gambling because we see that it determines the will of God what happens here. Whether it's this, and there's also a couple other situations where we see casting lots is done. But it never comes to a conclusion that somebody gets money or somebody's going to lose something. Usually casting lots determine what's going to happen here. Or somebody has done something and that lot has fell on the individual that has done something wrong. Do not confuse God's divine authority and God's power to show decision-making done here on earth to gambling. So as I finish up here, Dan Patrick infamously once said, he said Vegas wasn't built on winners. He's right. If you ever look at the Taj Mahal, or you ever look at Caesar's Palace, you ever look at any of the fine decorations that go throughout the Vegas Strip, it's not built by losers, or it's not built by winners. It's built by losers. 10 years ago, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NHL, and the WNBA would say to themselves they would never put a sporting venue in Las Vegas. Within 5 years, they all did. Vegas has expanded because if you look at the statistics, this is a $67 billion revenue just in the United States by itself. And it's even more when it comes worldwide, especially online. Paul tells the Philippians, he says, don't do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. The one thing we didn't talk about when it comes to sin is selfishness. That is a byproduct of gambling as well. Because in order for someone to win, somebody has to lose. In order for me to win big, there's a lot of people that have to lose big. In order for Caesars to keep running the way they are, a lot of people have to lose. There's a reason why, when it comes to the money that they have, it's built in the deepest, darkest parts of their resort. And it's heavily guarded by security and all kinds of bells and whistles to make sure that nobody gets in and steals it. There's a reason why you see that individuals have tried to steal things out of Caesars and out of the Taj Mahal and some of the other places and have failed at it because of their security. They all understand that this thing causes problems. And they want to make sure they don't have to take blame for it. That goes to my last passage. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5 says, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. He has to reassure us very often that even though things may not be as great as you want it to be, God says, don't worry, I have you. Don't worry, for I am with you. He tries to encourage us very often how great it should be in our lives, even though we don't have the greatest of wealth or the greatest car or the most beautiful house or the best suits or the best of clothing. We may not have any of these things. We may not have the greatest of jobs. But God reminds us through this passage that I am still here for you. And if you don't think I'm still here for you, then what was Christ's sacrifice all about? Be encouraged, brethren, that we don't have to fall into this kind of temptation to do the right thing. We don't have to try to justify how this thing has bred so many other sins in this world. No, you won't see thou shalt not gamble, but you can see very many other things that this breeds and the dangers behind it. So, as we finish up here, let's be mindful of that sacrifice Christ has made for you and me. If we have that, what else do we need? He pleads for you tonight. If there's one here who has not obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, I was already foretold that the water is warm and it's filled up to the hilt. for anybody who wants to be baptized. Melody, you want to be baptized again? It was cold when we did it. But it's available, so someone that wants to do it tonight can have the opportunity to do it tonight. Maybe someone needs to repent of sins. Maybe needs to make a change. That's all. There's an opportunity available for that tonight as well. That's available for anybody. But we don't know unless you take the opportunity and take a step. Maybe you need to pray about something tonight. Difficulties are not uncommon for any of us. And maybe you are struggling with something. Let's pray about it tonight. But the opportunity that you have is right before your eyes, right here, right now. If you need to respond, won't you come while we stand, while we sing?